Welcome to Life Stories, where the quietest moments sometimes hold the loudest truths. Imagine building a multi-million-dollar company from nothing, only to be told at your own father's birthday party that the front door isn't for you. What does it take to be seen by the people who raised you? What happens when success doesn't earn you a seat at the family table, but a folding chair in the back? Today's story isn't just about ambition. It's about silence, sacrifice, and the brutal beauty of reclaiming your worth when no one else will hand it to you. If you've ever felt invisible to the ones who should have loved you the loudest, this story will stay with you long after the final word. Let's go back to the beginning, before the recognition, before the applause, when all she had was a greenhouse, a broken heart, and a name she refused to let go of. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows over the Kansas plains as I stood in front of the white farmhouse that shaped and nearly shattered who I became. The gift in my hands was wrapped carefully, professionally, a rare 1962 International Harvester tractor model that had taken me 3 months to find. My father's first tractor had been the real version of it. I thought maybe, just maybe, it would mean something. But standing there, my heels sinking slightly into the gravel, my dress clinging to the sweat of anxiety more than the summer heat, I realized I was trembling. Not from fear, from the weight of everything unspoken. "Park around back. Use the kitchen door," Travis said, not even meeting my eyes. My younger brother, older in status apparently, his voice was casual, almost distracted, like I was an Amazon delivery, not the founder and CEO of Terra Bloom Technologies, a company that had helped redefine agricultural sustainability across 12 states. 10 years, $47 million in contracts, a Forbes cover, and I was still the girl with dirt under her fingernails who wasn't allowed to walk through the front door. Not where legacy lived, not where our family photos hung, except I hadn't been in any since I was 18. My name is Samantha Whitaker. I'm 35, and I own more acres through partnership and tech licensing than this entire town has collectively harvested in a decade. But none of that mattered here. Not in Harrow County. Not in the house my father built with the same stubborn hands he used to push me out of it. The party was in full swing. Polished boots, belt buckles, and bourbon-laced laughter spilled through open windows. From behind the kitchen screen, I could hear someone ask if the helper with the gift had arrived yet. My mother rushed to correct them. "This is my daughter," she said, voice thin, hesitant. A blush crept up the back of her neck when I stepped inside. Darlene Whitaker, ever loyal, ever soft-spoken, her love wrapped in silence and sacrifice. She gave me a hug that smelled of flower and lavender. "Your father will be glad you're here," she whispered, eyes darting toward the living room. I didn't believe her. And neither did she. Inside, the walls were lined with memories. Jason's football trophies, Travis's wedding portraits, 3 generations of Whitaker men framed in golden light. I was a ghost in my own family history, edited out with surgical precision. I moved through the crowd like a stranger, people turning only once they realized who I was, and some still didn't, until he walked in. "Is Samantha Whitaker here?" I was told she might be attending. A voice rich and clear cut through the room. Blake Sanderson, regional banking giant, shook my hand with reverence. "Madam CEO," he said loudly, "it's an honor. Terra Bloom is changing the face of ag tech." The room froze. Every voice dulled into silence. Every head turned toward me. And my father, Hank Whitaker, finally looked up. Blake clapped a hand on my shoulder. "Your father mentioned you might be here. I had to come meet the woman who's revolutionizing how we think about irrigation systems. Your efficiency data is outstanding." My father had mentioned me? That wasn't possible. I studied his face. Weathered, impenetrable. But his eyes weren't angry. They weren't proud either. They were calculating, measuring what this new information meant for his reputation. Blake went on to praise our drought-resistant soil sensors, our precision watering systems, our impact on local yields. My brothers shifted in place, wives suddenly interested in everything I had to say. And I stood there, smiling, answering questions, sipping punch with the same hand I once used to write scholarship essays by candlelight, because the farmhouse lights had been shut off for priority expenses. Later, I found myself alone with Hank in the old barn where everything had started, where when I was 13, I built my first greenhouse out of salvaged plastic and a dream no one took seriously. The full-size tractor he'd restored stood nearby, gleaming with fresh paint. He hadn't opened my gift, just left it sitting there. I looked at him. "Dad, what's the name of my company?" I asked, soft but deliberate. He blinked. "What?" "The name of my company. You've heard the pitch, the stats, the Forbes article. What's it called?" He didn't answer. He couldn't. The silence yawned wide, more damning than any insult he could have hurled. 10 years of building something from the dirt up, 10 years of mailing articles, calling mom, sending updates, and he hadn't even bothered to know the name. I told him. TerraBloom Technologies. He nodded like it was new information, like he might now make space for it in whatever drawer he kept reserved for facts that weren't quite comfortable. "You left," he said finally. "You chose this." I stepped closer. "You told me to leave, Dad. You said college was a waste of money for a girl. You told me not to come back if I left, and when I succeeded anyway, you erased me." My voice didn't crack, not once, because now I was done trying to be readmitted into a home that never really had a place for me. From the shadows, Jason emerged. "We didn't know," he said, eyes downcast. "About the company. What you were doing. Not really." "You never asked," I said simply. Jason shifted. "You could have said something." "I did," I replied, gesturing to the tractor model, still unopened. "I've said something every year for the past 10. The barn filled with silence again. But it wasn't empty. It was charged. With grief, regret, maybe something unspoken that none of us had language for yet. I didn't stay for cake. I didn't hug anyone goodbye. I walked out the front door. Yes, the front. Without asking for permission. For the first time, I didn't feel like I had something to prove. Have you ever been told your worth depended on how well you fit someone else's idea of success? What would you do if the place that raised you refused to recognize the person you became? She had come for closure, but what she found in that barn would ignite something deeper, something neither forgiveness nor distance could extinguish. And as the morning light crept over the fields, Samantha made a decision that would change the future of the Whittaker family forever. The hotel room felt sterile, too quiet for the noise roaring in my chest. I hadn't turned on the lights, just let the TV flicker silently in the background as I sat on the edge of the bed, my dress wrinkled from the drive, my makeup long since faded. My phone buzzed once. Then again, I knew it was Jessica. She always waited an hour after emotional landmines before reaching out, like she understood grief required time to take form. I picked up on the third buzz. "So," she said gently, "how bad was it?" I told her everything. The handshake from Blake Sanderson, the deafening silence from my father, the way my name had cracked the room open, but not my family's hearts. She listened. And then she asked the one thing no one else had ever dared to say aloud. "Sam, if he doesn't want to be proud of you, what are you still trying to prove to him?" The question lodged in my throat like a splinter. I didn't answer it that night, but it kept me up, kept me pacing the room until sunrise. I kept thinking about that unopened gift, about my father's blank expression when I said the name TerraBloom, how it didn't register, not even a flicker. He had never read a single article, never watched a single interview. He'd ignored the Forbes cover that had felt like a mountain I climbed barefoot. I thought the problem was that he didn't know me anymore. But the real problem, the unbearable truth, was that he never tried to. By morning, something had shifted. It wasn't rage. It wasn't grief. It was resolve. I wasn't going to fly back to Austin without saying what needed to be said. Not this time. I got dressed in jeans and a loose blue button-up, practical, unfussy, but undeniably myself. I skipped breakfast and drove straight back to the farm. This time, I parked in front. This time, I didn't knock. My mother was in the kitchen, still in her robe, her eyes widening at the sight of me. "Sam," she said, voice cautious. "I thought you left." "I had a later flight," I said, though it was a lie. "I need to talk to Dad, now." She hesitated only a second before nodding. "He's in the workshop." And then she added, "Do what you came here to do." The workshop was behind the barn, half shadowed by a sycamore tree planted the year I was born. It had grown thick and wild in the decade I'd been gone. I found my father inside, bent over a rusted valve from one of the old pivots. He didn't look up when I entered. "Mom said you wanted to talk," he said flatly. "So talk." "I'm not here to argue," I began. "I'm here to tell you something, and after I do, you can say what you want, or say nothing at all." He stood straight, wiping his hands on a rag. His face was unreadable, but his posture said, "Make it quick." "I've spent the last 10 years building something out of nothing. While you were raising corn, I was building algorithms. While Jason and Travis inherited, I innovated. And for all that time, I kept hoping maybe one day I'd get a call. Just one. Asking how it was going, telling me you were proud." I paused, feeling the words swell inside me. But last night made something clear. You don't care about the company or the work. You only started caring when other people did. He opened his mouth, but I kept going. "You said I left, that I chose to walk away, but you gave me the door and told me not to come back if I stepped through it. You decided farming wasn't for girls, and when I proved it could be, you called it different instead of admitting it had value." He set down the rag. "You're twisting it." "No," I said quietly. "I'm finally seeing it for what it is. You didn't lose me because I left. You lost me because you never saw me in the first place." A long silence passed. Then he muttered, "Your brothers were jealous, you know, of the attention you got after Sanderson's speech." I blinked. "Jealous?" He nodded, reluctantly. "They worked this land every day for 10 years. Then you walk in and suddenly everyone's talking about what you built. That's hard for a man to swallow." "I worked too," I said. "Just in a different field. Why is it always a competition?" He didn't answer. He walked to the window, staring out at the eastern field. "The soil's changing," he said. "The climate's shifting. The old ways aren't working like they used to." For a moment, I thought he might say something meaningful. Instead, he added, "Your system might help, if it works." That "if" wasn't just about technology. It was about everything. I felt it like a slap. I swallowed, nodded once, and said, "You'll get the proposal by Monday, free of charge." I turned to go, but he called after me. "Sam?" I froze. "Your mother, she kept every damn article." The words hit me harder than I expected. She kept them in a box in the linen closet, brought them out last night, made me read every one. I didn't know what to say. "I didn't know you'd done all that," he added. "Not really." I looked at him. "You didn't want to." He didn't argue. I drove away without looking back, not because I was angry, but because something was finally over. The chasing, the hoping. I had spent my whole life asking a man for acknowledgement who didn't know how to give it, but the truth was, I no longer needed it to define who I was. Have you ever realized too late that someone's silence had shaped your entire sense of worth? What would you do if the closure you wanted came wrapped in disappointment instead of healing? But sometimes the truth doesn't end a story. It cracks it open. Because what Samantha finds next won't just shake the roots of her family, but the future of everything she thought she was building. Thanksgiving came with frost on the windows and a sky so blue it hurt to look at. I hadn't planned on returning to the farm again so soon, but the invitation had come in my mother's voice, uncertain but hopeful. "Your father asked if you'd come," she said, as if those words might collapse if spoken too loudly. I told her I'd think about it, but I didn't need to. The second she said he'd asked, something inside me cracked, not with pain this time, but with a cautious kind of warmth I hadn't felt in years. I arrived early, before most of the family had pulled in. No one directed me where to park. No one told me to use the kitchen entrance. I stepped through the front door like I had always belonged there, and for the first time, no one questioned it. The house smelled of sage and roasted turkey and the buttery scent of my mother's cornbread. Darlene was humming to herself in the kitchen, her hair pulled back, apron dusted with flour. She looked up and smiled, not just with relief, but with something stronger, quiet pride. My father was in the living room reading over the latest irrigation system report I had sent. He didn't look up immediately, just tapped a line on the page and said, "Eastern Field's readings are better than we've had in 5 years. I nodded. "The sensors are doing their job." He folded the paper and finally met my eyes. "So are you." There was no grand apology, No sweeping speech, but in his voice, I heard something I'd never heard before: respect, stripped of ego. That was enough. The house filled quickly after that. Jason's sons tumbled into the foyer with muddy sneakers and wild grins. Curtis's daughter clung to her mother's leg until I knelt down and introduced myself as her aunt who builds water machines for farmers. She looked skeptical until I told her tractors were still cooler. Then she smiled. My brothers were warmer than before, in their own cautious ways. Jason asked about our upcoming expansion into California vineyards. Curtis offered to walk me through their new corn varietals. We weren't healed, but we were talking. And in this family, that was a beginning. At dinner, I was seated at the main table between my mother and my father, a space I hadn't occupied in almost 20 years. My name was included in the family grace, my work mentioned with reverence, rather than skepticism. After the meal, while kids ran through the yard and the men watched football, I wandered outside, drawn to the greenhouse I'd built when I was 13. The path was still narrow, overgrown at the edges, but the structure stood resilient against the cold. My father had replaced the door. The hinges no longer squeaked. Inside, it smelled of old soil and memory. The plant I had taken a cutting from that summer, the descendant of my very first experimental hybrid, was now thriving in the test beds at Terra Bloom. But here, in this quiet, I felt the pulse of what I had once created with nothing but borrowed tools and stubborn belief. My mother had cleaned it up. I could tell by the stacked pots, the scrubbed counters, the packet of seeds left in a tin labeled Sam's Corner. I hadn't cried in years, not really. But I did then, standing in that tiny shed of forgotten dreams now revived. When I returned to the house, my father was waiting on the porch, a blanket draped over his shoulders. He gestured for me to sit beside him. We watched the horizon together, golden light spilling across the fields like honey. He cleared his throat. "You remember your grandfather's journal?" he asked. I nodded. It was a battered leather-bound thing he'd used to track planting cycles and rainfall. "I found something in the back a few weeks ago," my father said, pulling a folded page from his coat. He handed it to me without explanation. The ink was faded, but the handwriting was familiar. "If one of my children ever breaks from the land," it read, "I hope it's not seen as betrayal. Sometimes the future doesn't come from the soil. It comes from someone learning how to make it yield in new ways." I looked up at him, eyes burning. "He wrote that?" My father nodded. "He never showed it to me either. Guess I wasn't ready to read it then, just like I wasn't ready to see what you were becoming." The silence between us was heavy, but it wasn't painful this time. It was full. He turned to me. "There's something else." I waited. "I'm signing over a portion of the land," he said slowly. 20 acres on the south end. It's yours if you want it. To test whatever new things you're working on. Not charity. A partnership." I stared at him. "Why?" I whispered. "Because for the first time," he said, "I want to be part of what you're building, not just in the way." And then he added, almost too softly to hear, "I'm proud of you, Sam." That night, after the dishes were cleaned and the kids were asleep, we gathered for a family photo. My mother made sure I stood in the middle. When Jason's wife clicked the camera, I didn't smile for them. I smiled for myself, for the girl who once believed she had to be small to stay loved. For the woman who had outgrown that lie and planted something bigger in its place. 6 months later, I broke ground on the Terra Bloom demonstration farm, on the 20 acres my father gave me. He was there for the ceremony, standing beside me, weathered hands on the shovel handle, his name etched beside mine on the plaque. The picture made the local papers, but it wasn't the headline that mattered. It was the small, handwritten sign I had placed at the edge of the field. It said simply, "Sam's Corner. Planted here, grown everywhere." How did this story make you feel? Did any part of Samantha's journey remind you of your own? If you loved this story, comment 100 below. Let us know what country you're watching from. And don't forget to share this story with a friend who needs to remember their worth. Thank you for watching Life Stories.